I had always pictured myself owning a cabin someday, a peaceful hideaway hidden in the mountains, far removed from the noise and chaos of city living. After years of putting money aside and living modestly, I finally found it, a small, perfect cabin tucked deep in the woods, miles from the closest town. It felt like destiny. I signed the paperwork, took the keys, and spent that first week simply inhaling the crisp mountain air, convinced I was the luckiest man alive. But that feeling didn't last. About a month later, an envelope showed up in my mailbox. It was from an organization called the Mountain Valley Preservation Association. I had never heard of them before. The letter sounded polished, almost welcoming at first, congratulating me on joining the community. Then it casually dropped a bombshell, an annual maintenance fee of $5,000. $5,000 for what exactly? The letter vaguely listed road maintenance, scenic preservation, and community services. I stared at the rough gravel path leading to my cabin. It could barely qualify as a road. And community services? My nearest neighbor was miles away. I was confused but assumed there had to be some mistake. So I called the number listed on the letter. A gruff-voiced man answered, introducing himself as Mr. Henderson, president of the association. I calmly explained that when I purchased a property, no one mentioned any association or mandatory dues. Henderson laughed softly. He said every property owner in the valley was automatically a member, whether they realized it or not. The fee, he insisted, was mandatory and due by the end of the month. If I failed to pay, there would be consequences. The way he said it made my stomach tighten. It didn't sound like a neighborly reminder. It sounded like a threat. I decided to investigate. I combed through every document for my property purchase. There was no mention of a homeowners association, no required fees, nothing at all. My deed was clean. I owned the land outright. This association had no legal authority over me or my property. Confident in that fact, I chose not to pay. A week later, another letter arrived, this one far less friendly. It was a formal demand for payment, now including late fees. It warned that continued refusal would result in a lien placed against my property and eventual foreclosure. They were threatening to take my home, my dream cabin. This was no misunderstanding. It was intimidation. My quiet retreat had transformed into a battleground. I knew I needed help. I began searching for a lawyer specializing in property law. The first few attorneys hesitated the moment they heard Homeowners Association, advising me to simply pay because HOAs typically held sweeping authority. But I explained this wasn't a legitimate HOA. Finally, I found Sarah, a sharp and attentive attorney who truly listened. When she examined my deed and read the association's letters, her expression changed. She noticed the same red flags I had. She agreed to represent me. Sarah immediately sent a formal request demanding the association provide their articles of incorporation, bylaws, and documented proof of their authority to charge fees on my property. Weeks passed without a reply. Instead, they continued mailing increasingly hostile bills. The total had climbed to nearly $7,000. The stress became overwhelming. Every knock at my door made my heart race, afraid someone had come to force me out. While the legal process moved slowly, I started asking questions around the valley. It wasn't easy. People were cautious. But eventually a few longtime residents opened up. They told me the truth about the Mountain Valley Preservation Association. Years earlier, Henderson and a handful of associates had created it. They held no legitimate power, but relied on complicated legal language and aggressive tactics to frighten homeowners into paying. One elderly resident, Mrs. Gable, shared how they had threatened her with eviction until her son, an out-of-state attorney, stepped in. They immediately retreated. Another man showed me stacks of identical letters he had received. He had paid for years out of fear. It was clear this wasn't isolated. It was a calculated scam targeting people who valued peace and didn't fully understand their rights. They were bullies exploiting intimidation. I began documenting everything. I gathered written statements, compiled names, and photographed the so-called maintained roads. Nothing more than pothole-ridden dirt paths that a heavy rain could wash away. I recorded my phone conversations with Henderson, during which he grew increasingly hostile, even threatening to block my access to my own property. The evidence piled up. My fight was no longer just about my cabin. It was about protecting everyone in that valley. Sarah was impressed with the evidence. It clearly pointed to fraud and racketeering. We filed a lawsuit against Henderson and the association, seeking not only to invalidate their claim against me, but also to pursue damages for harassment and emotional distress. We also filed a formal complaint with the state attorney general. That got their attention. Henderson suddenly wanted to negotiate. He offered to waive all my fees if I dropped the case. We refused. This had grown beyond a simple dispute over money. We intended to dismantle the entire operation. When the attorney general's office began investigating, what they uncovered was worse than we had imagined. The association had no legitimate legal standing. It was essentially a shell company Henderson used to funnel collected fees into his personal accounts. No roads had been maintained. No services had been provided. It was all fabricated. The court date finally arrived. Henderson and his associates appeared far less intimidating under courtroom lights. Faced with our compiled evidence, witness testimony, financial records uncovered by the Attorney General, and recordings of his threats, their defense unraveled quickly. The judge ruled decisively in our favor, declaring the association a fraudulent enterprise and nullifying all claims against me and other property owners. A permanent injunction was issued, barring them from contacting any Valley residents again. But it didn't stop there. Based on the Attorney General's findings, Henderson and his main accomplices were formally charged with multiple counts of fraud and extortion. Their intimidation campaign was over. The day the ruling came down, I drove back to my cabin. The air seemed fresher. The forest felt calmer. For the first time since moving in, it truly felt like mine, completely and unquestionably. Word spread throughout the valley. Homeowners who had paid for years stopped immediately. Mrs. Gable baked me an apple pie. The man with a stack of letters shook my hand, tears in his eyes. We had won. It wasn't an easy battle. It was stressful, costly, and at times deeply frightening. But standing on my porch, gazing at the mountains stretching endlessly before me, I knew every second had been worth it. I hadn't just protected my dream. I had helped restore peace to my community. Sometimes, protecting your slice of paradise requires standing firm and refusing to be intimidated. Thank you for listening to my story. If you ever find yourself facing something that feels unjust, stand your ground and seek support. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories like this. I'll see you next time.